When an 8-year-old boy asked Melania Trump if God listens, her response stunned the crowd. In the heart of Kansas, where the horizon stretches endlessly and life moves at a measured pace, a small town prepared for a day they wouldn't soon forget. The annual community fair was underway, a cherished tradition that brought families together to celebrate their shared values. The air smelled of freshly popped kettle corn, mingling with the sweetness of funnel cakes and the sharp tang of barbecue smoke. Children raced around in laughter, their faces painted like tigers and butterflies, while parents exchanged pleasantries near booths, selling handmade crafts and homegrown produce. Amid the cheerful bustle, a quiet ripple of excitement coursed through the crowd. Word had spread that Melania Trump, former First Lady of the United States, was attending as a guest of honor. She wasn't here for a formal speech or a flashy entrance, just a simple visit to meet families and show support for the local school's literacy program. Her presence, though understated, carried an air of dignity that drew people in. Standing near the stage, an 8-year-old boy named Ethan clutched his mother's hand tightly. His worn sneakers scuffed the dirt, and his fingers nervously toyed with the small cross necklace. Around his neck, Ethan wasn't like most kids his age. He had a thoughtful demeanor that often made him seem older than his years. Recently, life had dealt him a few hard lessons. His father, a truck driver, had been out of work for months, and Ethan had overheard whispered conversations about bills piling up and meals being stretched thin. But today, Ethan had a purpose. He had one question that had been burning in his mind, a question he felt only someone like Melania Trump could answer. He didn't know if he'd get the chance to speak with her, but the thought filled his young heart with equal parts, hope and fear. The crowd gathered near the stage as Melania arrived, dressed elegantly in a soft blue dress. She smiled warmly, waving to the families who had come to see her. She moved gracefully through the crowd, stopping to greet children and parents alike. Ethan stood frozen, his small frame almost lost in the sea of people. His mother gave his hand a gentle squeeze and whispered, "You'll regret it if you don't try honey." He nodded, mustering every ounce of courage he could find. Slowly, he let go of his mother's hand and stepped forward, weaving through the throng of people, until he was just a few feet from the former First Lady. She turned her eyes, meeting his, and for a moment the noise around them seemed to fade. Ethan's heart pounded as he gripped his necklace tighter. He wasn't sure if his voice would work, but he knew this was his moment. But in that fleeting second of silence, as their eyes locked, something shifted, an unspoken connection that gave him the courage to take the first step. Ethan felt the world around him blur, the vibrant hum of the crowd dimming, as his focus narrowed on the woman before him. His small hands trembled, the cross in his fingers digging into his palm like an anchor. Melania Trump knelt slightly, her graceful movements deliberate and warm, meeting him at eye level. The kindness in her expression steadied him, but the lump in his throat refused to go away. "Hi there," she said gently, her accent softening her words. "What's your name, Ethan?" He stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. He felt his cheeks flush as he glanced nervously at the crowd that had begun to quiet, their attention drawn to the small boy and the former First Lady. "Well, Ethan, it's so nice to meet you," she said, her smile encouraging. "What's on your mind?" Ethan swallowed hard, willing himself to speak. His voice was shaky, but his words were clear and deliberate, carrying the weight of the thoughts that had kept him awake so many nights. "Mrs. Trump," he began, his wide eyes shimmering with unshed tears, "do you think God still hears us when we feel forgotten?" The question hung in the air like a fragile thread, silencing the murmurs of the onlookers. A wave of emotion rippled through the crowd, some shifting uncomfortably, others visibly moved. Ethan's voice had cracked on the last word, his vulnerability laid bare for everyone to see. Melania's expression softened even further, her lips parting. As though she had stopped breathing for just a moment, she reached out, gently placing her hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Why do you ask me that, Ethan?" she asked, her tone tender but filled with genuine curiosity. Ethan hesitated, glancing down at the ground, before meeting her eyes again. "Sometimes I hear my mom crying at night. She tries to hide it, but I know my dad's been sad too, ever since he lost his job. We pray every night, but it feels like nothing changes." He paused, his small voice quivering. "And sometimes I feel like maybe God's not listening to us anymore." Gasps and murmurs broke out in the crowd, quickly hushed by the weight of the moment. Ethan's raw honesty had struck a chord, a reminder of struggles so many families faced, but rarely spoke of aloud. The little boy's words were not just his own. They were the unspoken fears of countless others, carried by a voice too young to hide behind pretense. Melania took a moment, her gaze unwavering, as she processed the depth of his question. But as the crowd waited breathless with anticipation, her response carried the promise of something far deeper than mere words. Melania gently placed both hands on Ethan's small shoulders, steadying him as though anchoring him in the moment. Her voice, when she finally spoke, carried a calm, measured warmth that seemed to embrace not just Ethan, but the entire crowd. "Ethan," she began, her accent lending a soft musicality to her words, "I want you to listen to me very carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is something I believe with all my heart." The boy's eyes stayed locked on hers, wide and brimming with anticipation. The crowd leaned in, captivated by the sincerity radiating from the former First Lady. "God always hears us," she said, her tone firm yet soothing. "Even when it feels like no one is listening, He is there sometimes, though He doesn't answer in the way we expect. He answers through the people around us, the love of your mother, the strength of your father. And even in moments like this, when someone like you has the courage to speak from their heart." Ethan blinked rapidly, tears spilling down his cheeks, as her words seemed to reach a place deep within him. Melania continued, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know it's hard when things feel heavy, like they're never going to get better," she said, glancing briefly at the crowd, her gaze sweeping over parents who nodded silently, their own struggles mirrored in Ethan's story. "But God doesn't forget us. He gives us the strength to keep going, even when it feels impossible." And Ethan, just by asking this question, you've reminded everyone here that faith doesn't disappear. It grows when we share it. Her words resonated deeply, weaving through the crowd like an unspoken prayer. Ethan's small shoulders began to relax under her hands, his grip on the necklace loosening slightly. He sniffled, wiping his face with the sleeve of his shirt. But the tears kept coming, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming comfort of her response. Melania reached for the cross necklace in his hand, holding it gently between her fingers. "This little cross," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "is a reminder that even when you feel forgotten, you are never alone. Wear it proudly, Ethan, because it represents hope, and hope is what keeps us moving forward." Ethan nodded slowly, his chest rising and falling as he took a deep breath. The crowd around them was utterly still, many wiping their eyes, caught in the profound beauty of the moment. Some parents instinctively reached for their children's hands, while others exchanged glances of quiet understanding. Melania let go of the necklace and stood up, her eyes scanning the audience. "We all need to remember this," she said, her voice now carrying to everyone gathered. "We are stronger when we lift each other up. Faith isn't just something we keep inside. It's something we share." Her words were met with a soft murmur of agreement, some breaking into applause, others simply standing in silent reflection. Ethan looked up at her, his tears finally subsiding as a small, shy smile crept onto his face. But just as the moment seemed to settle, a woman in the crowd raised her hand, her voice breaking as she spoke. adding another layer of depth to the unfolding event. The woman in the crowd stepped forward, her face etched with emotion. Her voice quivered, yet there was a resolve in her words. "Mrs. Trump," she began, holding a toddler on her hip, "what you just said, I think it's what we all needed to hear. Life hasn't been easy for many of us lately. We've all felt forgotten at some point. But today, hearing this, it reminds me that maybe we're not as alone as we think." Melania turned to her, offering the same steady warmth she had shown Ethan. "It's true," she replied, addressing the woman and the crowd. "We are never alone, but sometimes it's up to us to remind each other that." The toddler in the woman's arms reached out toward Melania with innocent curiosity, prompting a soft chuckle from those nearby. Melania extended a hand, gently brushing the child's fingers, creating a fleeting but tender moment that eased the heaviness lingering in the air. Ethan, still standing quietly beside his mother, watched the interaction, a newfound sense of calm settling over him. His mother knelt down, pulling him into a tight embrace, whispering, "I'm so proud of you." Her words carried a weight of gratitude, not just for her son's bravery, but for the connection this moment had forged. Among everyone present, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations rippled through the crowd as strangers exchanged stories of their struggles. A father standing nearby spoke about losing his small business and the uncertainty it brought to his family. A young woman shared how she had battled loneliness after moving to the town. Each story carried a common thread: the need to feel seen, to feel heard. Ethan's question had unlocked something deep within the community. It was as if his courage had given everyone permission to lay their burdens down, if only for a moment, and to find solace in knowing they weren't alone. Melania, still near the stage, listened attentively as the stories poured out. She didn't interrupt or try to respond to each one, but stood as a quiet witness to the humanity unfolding before her. The sense of connection was palpable, stretching beyond words, weaving the crowd into something stronger, more united as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The community fair transformed from a light-hearted event into a profound gathering of shared faith and resilience. Melania stepped back toward the microphone, her voice carrying over the gentle murmurs. "Today," she said, "Ethan reminded us all of something important. We need each other no matter how hard life gets, no matter how forgotten we may feel. There's always someone willing to listen, someone willing to care. Let's not forget that as we leave here tonight." The crowd erupted into applause, a release of emotion that felt like a collective exhale. Ethan stood taller now, his mother's hand on his shoulder, his small but brave question having sparked something far greater than he ever imagined. But as the applause began to fade and the event wound down, whispers of what had just transpired spread like wildfire, ensuring the day would live on in the hearts and minds of those who had witnessed it. The events of that afternoon didn't end at the fairground. As families packed up their strollers and folded chairs, the stories and emotions shared during Melania's visit lingered in the air. People who had never spoken to one another before exchanged kind words, some even offering to meet for coffee or to help with babysitting. A sense of unity replaced the quiet isolation many had carried in their hearts. Ethan and his mother walked home under a sky dotted with stars, the cool Kansas breeze gently brushing past them. His mother held his hand tightly, glancing down at him with a mix of pride and tenderness. "You did something very brave today," she said softly. "You reminded everyone that we're all connected, even when it doesn't feel like it." Ethan nodded, the small cross necklace still clutched in his hand. "Do you think things will get better now, Mom?" he asked, his voice hesitant but hopeful. She paused for a moment, looking down at her son. "I think they already are," she replied, her words carrying a conviction that hadn't been there before. Across town, similar conversations unfolded, At the local diner, a group of neighbors who had never met before found themselves seated at the same table, recounting the moment when Ethan asked his question. One man, a mechanic named Joe, shared how he'd been struggling to find work after his shop closed. Hearing that boy talk about his family, he said, shaking his head, "It made me realize I've been so wrapped up in my own troubles that I forgot how many others are going through the same thing." Another woman, a retired teacher named Eleanor, nodded in agreement. It's easy to feel alone, even in a small town like this. But that little boy, he reminded us of the power of being vulnerable, of sharing what's on our hearts. The conversations didn't stop there. Over the next few days, stories about the fair began circulating. On social media, a video someone had recorded of Ethan and Melania went viral, capturing the raw emotion of their interaction. Comments poured in from across the country, some from people moved to tears, others sharing their own experiences of feeling forgotten and finding hope in unexpected places. Church groups in neighboring towns organized food drives and support networks. Inspired by Ethan's courage, parents who had been struggling quietly began opening up to friends and neighbors, seeking and offering support. The ripple effect was undeniable, transforming not just a small Kansas town, but also the hearts of those who heard the story from afar. Ethan, however, remained largely unaware of the impact he had made. To him, it wasn't about the attention or the praise. It was about asking a question that had weighed on his young heart. And while he couldn't articulate it, he felt lighter now, as though a part of the burden he'd been carrying had lifted as the days turned into weeks. The town began to feel different. Strangers smiled at one another more often. Acts of kindness, both big and small, became a common occurrence. And through it all, the memory of that day at the fair remained, a beacon of hope, a reminder of how one simple question could ignite a spark that spread far beyond anyone's expectations. But as life slowly returned to its usual rhythm, the town was left with one undeniable truth: the power of faith and connection wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was something they could carry forward together. Months later, life in the small Kansas town had shifted subtly, but profoundly. The community fair was still a topic of conversation, especially on Sundays after church, or during casual chats at the grocery store. People spoke of Ethan's bravery with admiration and gratitude, often recounting the way his simple, heartfelt question had brought a crowd of strangers together. Ethan, now a little taller and a little more confident, had found new friendships at school. His teachers noticed a spark in him, a quiet strength that inspired others. He still wore the cross necklace every day, a symbol of the moment that changed, not just his perspective, but also the lives of those around him. For his family, the road ahead wasn't without challenges. His father continued searching for steady work, and his mother juggled long shifts to keep the household running. But the weight of their struggles seemed lighter now. Neighbors began showing up unprompted with casseroles, offers to babysit, and even job leads. The community's newfound sense of unity turned what once felt like insurmountable obstacles into shared burdens beyond their town. The story of Ethan and Melania's encounter continued to resonate. News outlets picked it up, framing it as a reminder of the enduring power of faith and connection in difficult times. Letters and emails poured in from people all over the country, some sharing their own struggles, others expressing how deeply the story had touched them. For Melania Trump, the day had left an indelible mark. In interviews, she spoke of Ethan with admiration, describing his courage as a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Sometimes it's the smallest voices, she said, that remind us of the biggest truths. The lesson was clear: no matter how alone we may feel, there is always someone listening, always someone willing to stand beside us. Faith isn't just about waiting for answers. It's about finding strength in one another. and recognizing the small moments of grace that guide us forward. As Ethan's town prepared for the next year's fair, a new tradition began to take shape. A portion of the proceeds would now go toward supporting struggling families in the community, a tangible legacy born from a young boy's question and the profound moment that followed. For Ethan, life carried on as it always had, but he walked with a little more confidence, a little more faith. He knew now without a doubt that God heard him, not always in the way he expected, but always through the love and kindness of those around him. And as the sun set on another day, in the town that had learned to lean on one another, the story of that single question continued to inspire, a quiet but powerful reminder that even the smallest voices can spark a light in the darkness. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on the power of faith, connection, and courage in your own life. Share this message with someone who might need it today. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire and bring us together.